Pearl Harbor and the Nihao incident. On December 7, 1941, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Although World War II had been raging for 2 years at this point, the U.S. was remaining neutral. But the Japanese feared their interference and chose to launch a preemptive strike. It was one of the most devastating attacks on home ground that the U.S. has ever experienced. Without formal declaration of war or any suggestion that they might launch this unprecedented volley at the U.S., their actions were later declared a war crime. But as always, within the theater of war and the large events we all know are 1,000 smaller stories of individuals. And during Pearl Harbor, the story of a Japanese airman who landed on a previously thought to be uninhabited island near Honolulu was one of them. Shigenori Nishikaichi was just 22 years old when the attack on Pearl Harbor happened. He had not long finished his training when he was ordered to take part in the second wave on the naval base under the command of Lieutenant Commander Shigekazu Shimazaki. The attack consisted of 171 planes, 54 high-level bombers, 81 dive bombers, and 36 fighter planes with Nishikaichi's B-11-120 among them. The first wave of bombs was dropped on Hickam Field in the early morning, before almost immediately following up with a direct strike by the Japanese torpedo planes on Pearl Harbor's battleships. Devastation rained down on the unsuspecting personnel of the base, but more was coming. The second wave and Nishikaichi were still on their way. The Americans quickly sent up aircraft in response, and Nishikaichi found himself in the middle of an airfight where 6 enemy bullets damaged his plane, with one punching a hole in the gas tank itself. The Japanese made their escape, having successfully destroyed multiple ships on the naval base, but trailing behind the other fighters, none were at the rendezvous point when Nishikaichi arrived. His plane sputtering, he made his way to Nihao, an officially designated uninhabited island where the airman believed he could crash land his plane until help from superiors came. But the Japanese were wrong. Nihao wasn't uninhabited at all. In fact, it was privately owned by the Robinson family, who used it as a sheep and cattle ranch. The islanders were mainly employees of the family and rarely received news from the outside world, mainly only receiving information via a boat from Kauai Island once a week. As such, they also had no idea that that very morning history had been made and the Japanese were actively attacking the United States. Up in the air, the promised rescue submarines were nowhere to be seen. Circling the island, Nishikaichi realized he would have no choice but to crash land on Nihao. Resident and prominent member of the community Howard Kaleohano was the first to reach the plane as it landed near his house, grabbing Nishikaichi's pistols and papers as soon as he noticed them. The rest of the island gathered, and after a few attempts to communicate unsuccessfully, sent for one of the only 2 Japanese residents on Nihao, 30-year-old Harada. According to reporter and historian Walter Lord, Harada was unable to get much out of Nishikaichi initially, but reporter Beekman tells a different story, claiming he told Harada the truth immediately. But Harada deemed it prudent to keep it secret for the time being from the Hawaiian natives. Whichever account is true, Harada did learn the truth, and what happened next was inevitable from the moment he found out about the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Initially, the inhabitants attempted to ship the Japanese airmen to the Robinson family, who lived on a nearby island, but due to poor weather, they had to keep him on Nihao. They were forced to make different arrangements, taking Nishikaichi to Kiekie, where they made the fateful decision to allow him to lodge with Harada and his wife Irene, under the supervision of 5 islander guards. Soon, Nishikaichi had planted the seeds of Japanese patriotism deep into the Harada's minds, telling tales of victories and the Japanese fight for their nation, and importantly, the ultimate goal for many Japanese in war, death with honor. Over the previous 2 days, Nishikaichi had observed the islanders, believing he could successfully take control of these innocent people and regain his lost papers that he feared contained Japanese intelligence the U.S. could use. He convinced the Haradas to support him, and shortly thereafter, when instead of the usual guard, only Hanaiki Niao was on duty, they seized their chance. Claiming the need for the bathroom, Harada and Nishikaichi led Niao to the honey warehouse instead, where the 2 Japanese men promptly pointed guns at the man, forcing him into the warehouse and locking him in. From there, they held up Niao's wife and 4 children who were coincidentally returning to the village, stealing their wagon and forcing the eldest daughter to take them to the house of Howard Kaleohano and the crash site of Nishikaichi's aircraft. Once there, they released their prisoner in favor of taking 16-year-old Kaleahilihi Niao, who was guarding the plane, hostage. But luckily, Howard saw them approach, and realizing the gun in Kalahilihi's back was not their way of saying a friendly hello, immediately tried to run for cover. Harada aimed the shotgun at him unsuccessfully, and Howard was able to make it to the village to warn the other residents, evacuate, and alert the authorities. In the meantime, the 2 Japanese men tore apart Howard's house in an unsuccessful effort to find his missing papers. From there, they went through other Nihauans' houses and took all the machine gun ammo from the downed aircraft, piling it for future use against the islanders. It was now nightfall, and the 2 men proceeded to march up and down the streets of the village, intermittently searching houses for papers and bellowing for Howard to be given up by the islanders. But as they were doing this, they were watched secretly by the Nihauans in hiding who had not yet made it off the island. One of which was Ben Kanahele, a man in his 50s, but still of great physical strength. Ben and another islander, Kahakila Kalima Huluhulu, or Kalima for short, waited until nightfall before stealing the ammo Harada and Nishikaichi had laid out by the plane. While at 3 a.m. the 2 Japanese men set fire to Howard's house in a final attempt to destroy any evidence the papers may provide to the American authorities. Not long after, having successfully stolen the ammo, Ben and his wife Ella decided to make another attempt at the village, this time to get food alongside Kalima's wife. This time they were not so lucky, promptly being taken captive by Harada and Nishikaichi. At this time, Ben was thoroughly fed up of being threatened with murder. He had played the part instructed, wandering the streets alongside Kalima's wife, futilely calling for Howard, although he knew the man was far away, hopefully getting them help at this very moment. Soon after, he gave up returning to the 2 Japanese men out of fear for his wife's safety. Turning to Harada, he said, "Take the pistol away from him before he kills someone." But of course, Harada did not comply. What happened next was an act of desperation. As pilot Nishikaichi turned, distracted, to sort out the shotgun, Ben and Ella leaped at the 2 men. In the ensuing struggle, Nishikaichi managed to successfully shoot Ben 3 times in the hip, chest, and groin. But running off adrenaline and strong as he was, in response, Ben grabbed Nishikaichi by his neck and leg, throwing him against the stone wall. Ella leaped upon the pilot, a rock in hand, beating in his head with it. Whether he was dead before what happened next is unclear, but behind her, Ben picked up his hunting knife, slitting Nishikaichi's throat. In an instant, the young pilot was dead and his patriotic plan had failed. Harada was still alive and kicking, for now, but seeing what had happened, seeing the young pilot dead on the floor and all his tales of patriotism and Japanese superiority dying with him, Harada turned the shotgun on himself, shooting himself in the stomach. When Hawaiian authorities finally reached the island, there was nothing left for them to do but to give Ben a Medal of Merit and the Purple Heart for his heroism. His wife Ella, however, received no such recognition.